Welcome back to the Shine Within podcast. Meet Alreen Haeggquist, a dedicated lawyer and advocate with over 2 decades of experience in fighting for women's rights against sexual harassment and discrimination. Founder of the Haeggquist and Eck LLP in San Diego, Alreen has won significant settlements for her clients, drawing from her own experiences outlined in her book, Fired Up, Feeling Triumph from Trauma. Her work challenges the silence that empowers abuse, making her a powerful voice in the legal advocacy and a transformative leader. Thank you so much for being on my show. I'm excited to speak with you today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, me too. So, Alreen, I know your journey is both inspiring and profoundly moving. Could you actually go ahead and share with us what motivated you to go ahead and pursue law and specifically focusing on advocating for victims of sexual abuse and discrimination?
Sure. So just going back a little bit, as a child, I was abused in the hands of my father, and so it was in every which way. It was not only the sexual abuse, but he was physically abusive and emotionally abusive. And my mom, throughout the whole time, just stayed silent. So she knew what was going on and never did anything to stop it. And both of those things really shaped me in doing the work that I do because as I got older from that experience as a child, as I was getting older, I was constantly triggered by different things, and it would show up in different ways. And I went to law school because I always wanted to advocate for other people because it inherently came out. I didn't know it was triggers then, but I was inherently able to stand up for people and get really riled up, and it didn't matter who was on the other side. And so I started using that as like my superpower. And so that kind of came first of me advocating for other people. And then when I had to look internally as like where the triggers were being caused in my relationship, um, that's when I realized that by honing in on my own personal work, I was even being able to be a better advocate because I was able to control when my passion and my advocacy came out. So I know that was a long, long answer as to why I do the work I do, but it really is a result of my own experience. And now I'm able to say the things for my clients that I didn't say for myself when I was a child.
Wow. And then what a healing process too. I was just sharing with you before we hit record that I had suffered from, this was my stepdad back then. My mom's remarried now to a wonderful man now who I call Papa because my dad was murdered as when I was a baby.
Oh,
And
wow.
just to share a little story, is that I used to draw pictures of a man and my mom and me, not including my siblings, because just us. And so she felt like she needed to start dating maybe again or so, and she did. And this man we thought had good intentions, but he started sexually abusing me. But kept silent because I didn't know. I was what, 5 years old, 6 years old, and I kept silent all the way until I was 22. And I want to say, because I kept silent, that that's why he was an alcoholic. I got goosebumps saying that, so I know it's probably true. I call them truth bumps. And I mask all my pain, all my emotion, everything. And I was just drinking all the time because I didn't want to feel. I didn't want to feel that icky feeling. My mom had no idea what was going on. Like I said, I didn't have a voice until I was 22, where the family saw like my behavior was so reckless that, okay, Gina, we need to sit down and get together and discuss what the heck is going on with you. And I straight up said, I'm probably like this because I was abused between the ages of 6 to 12 years old. And then there was silence. And then my mom had questioned me like, well, wait a minute. Different parts like birthmarks near that genitalia area. And I was like, well, why is she questioning me? She doesn't believe me. She thinks I'm lying. So I was like, what? I'm finally getting it out. But then she stopped and she was like, you want me to go find him? I'm like, no, mom, no. I'm just glad I was able to like bring it out and share this because it was traumatizing for me to keep it in. And I was in bad relationships throughout like high school and in early college. And it was just challenging to this, not to this day, because I've forgiven him, even though I don't speak to him, but in my heart, I have forgiven him. And I've just did the healing work. Now, I was curious as far as like what type of healing practices did you have to go through in order for you to move that energy out, because it is traumatizing?
Yeah, I just want to kind of just back up to all the things you just said. So thank you for sharing your story on this platform. But that's why I'm so passionate about what I do. It's you cannot heal yourself if you continue to deny and be silent about what happened. And I think that is so important because that experience, it forces you to have shame and fear about coming forward. It forces you to not want to talk about it, and it forces you to just keep silent and not say anything. But the longer you continue with that, the longer it's going to take you to heal. You can't start a healing journey if you're going to continue to deny that event or that occurrence or whatever it was happened to you. And the fact that 50% of women have experienced some sort of sexual assault, that there's so many of us that have this trauma and that stay silent. Again, it refocuses my efforts to make sure people know, like, this is how you do it. So it's before you can even have a healing modality, the step one is you got to admit that it happened. And so then to answer your question as to, what types of healing work have I done? I mean, I've done all sorts, right? So there's not this like linear pattern to healing. It's not like you wake up one day and say, okay, I was sexually abused as a kid and now I have all these consequences and now I'm going to start healing myself. It doesn't show up that way. For you, it showed up in being reckless in your actions. For me, it showed up because it was affecting the relationship with my husband and my daughter. Like, I didn't want that. I didn't know what was causing it, but I didn't want to have that type of relationship with the people that I loved. And so for me, step one was just going to therapy. And when I started therapy, I had never been. I didn't think I needed it. Didn't think it was for me because, I wasn't crazy or, I didn't have a mental illness. So therefore I didn't need to go, all the things. And again, I think that's part of the repression of what happened, right? You don't want to come forward. So you make every excuse in the book as to why you can't get help. But I started therapy. I go to the therapist and I'm like, hey, I just had a child and I'm having trouble like being present with her. Her crying is making me chilled. And I've heard this really helps. And I heard you're really good at, you're a specialist in child development. So I'd like to see you for 4 sessions. I'll tell you what happened to me as a kid. And I'm hoping that by the end of it, I feel better in my relationships. And of course he laughed because that's not how therapy works. And I continue to go to therapy now. So that was for me, step one. And just like you, I stayed silent my whole life. I mean, my book is really the first time I even outlined even a little bit of detail as to what happened to me as a kid. I hadn't shared it with my husband, with my closest friends. I mean, they had a very surface level idea that, hey, I suffered abuse as a kid, but not the extent of it. And so again, that was part of my healing, is by sharing my story. And because I see the profound effects of it, that's why I'm on podcast telling people that they also need to come forward. So therapy was one. I did inner child work. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, or for people who don't know what inner child work is. It's going back to the place of your experience and how you felt in that moment. And then your adult self talking to that child, how everything's going to be all right. That's what it was for me, because as a kid, when I was having these experiences, there was nobody there to protect me. There was nobody to save me. But now I have myself. And so it's telling yourself that you're going to be okay, as opposed to fighting with your body and trying to push it away. That's the other big thing that people kind of miss about trauma, right? Like, it has an effect on your body. And so when you start talking about autoimmune disease and whatever health conditions that people can't figure out what's causing it, right? It's like, I don't know what's wrong, but you're having these symptoms. It's likely some sort of trauma that's being kept inside that it's going unaddressed. So I had that as well, a lot of physical manifestations. And the inner child was really profound. Meditation was also very big for me. And meditation to change mindset, right? Again, like the negative thought patterns that come with trauma and abuse that you inflict on yourself. And so changing that thought pattern, I was able to do through meditative work. So those are just a few. I talk a lot more about it in my book, about the different modalities that I took. And I think it's just important for people to know there is not a one size fits all. It's not like, hey, do this and you're going to be healed. Or maybe if you do this, or there's not an overnight fix, right? Nothing is quick. We all want it to be quick. I promise you, if I could take a pill and if I could tell you there was a pill you could take and everything would be all right, I would. But it requires work and effort on your part. But it's so worth it, right? Because then it becomes like this, like a high that you chase. Like you're like, oh, okay, this is, I feel good. And then you kind of come to the next place and you find another way and you to go over that bump.
Yes, thanks for sharing that. The work works. Yes, the work works. And the beautiful, yes, I actually have a picture of myself on my, I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
Of my baby self. Oh, this is better. Of my
Oh,
baby self. And I give her love and compassion every day. And I tell her it's not your fault. Let me give you a hug.
yeah.
And it's so good to connect to that inner child because I mean, I still like she's coming out now and
Yeah.
having so much fun and loving life now because of that. And healing is a continuous journey. I feel like I'm healing every day. There's no stopping. I'm going to heal every day and it takes time. And like you said, there's not one size fits all. You picked and choose what works best for you and you'll see. Now, going back to my childhood and where you were talking about that manifestation of that energy that's trapped in there of trauma. Now, I had that in my gut. Now, I thought I was just very ill. My mom thought I was just very ill because I had stomach aches, knots in my intestines that you can see it like pulsing kind of. It was pretty insane. So she took me to Children's Hospital and they had diagnosed me with irritable bowel syndrome. I don't think I had irritable bowel syndrome, but that's what they diagnosed me as. So I was taking my Lanta, Pepto-Bismol, but it wasn't fixing anything. It would subside some of the gas bubbles that was being created from the nerves, but nothing worked. And then we did also what's called biofeedback. Still, again, this is still me keeping everything inside. I still never even told the therapist what was going on. I never told them anything until like I told you, like after 22. But it helped me relax my mind where I was in a different state. It was like kind of a meditative state where you're somewhere else calm and relax, and you're able to tell your body to relax from head to toe. And you feel much better. I took those practices, but yet everything was still stuck in there because I kept that all bottled up inside. So I love that you're bringing up that silence won't do you any good. It's good to let it out. That is the first step is to, hey, admit there was something going on and this is not okay. So thank you for that. Now I want to talk a little bit about your book, Fired Up, Fueling Triumph from Trauma. And now this is a powerful testament to your experiences of, you have a lot of resilience and I commend you for the work that you're doing. Can you actually go ahead and discuss your writing process and what was like for you and what did you decide to go ahead and tell your story?
Yeah, so I decided to tell my story for a few reasons. One, I represent women on a daily basis who have experienced some sort of sexual abuse, primarily in the workplace. And these women have to come forward. They have to tell their story, they have to make it public, and they have to be cross-examined on it. And I think they are so brave for coming forward. And I thought, wow, if you're doing that, I want you to know that I'm here with you, that I've had this experience and I can say me too with you. So they were a big part of it. The other part of it is for my own healing journey. Like I wanted to stop keeping it a secret because I know how much of an effect, just like you with your gut, same thing. By keeping it inside, it was affecting me on the inside. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis and it just would not go away. And it finally, the symptoms finally stopped when I stopped fighting myself as to what happened, right? Kind of what I was talking about earlier. By keeping silent, you're telling your body to repress something that's a part of you. You're telling your body to shove something away that's a part of you, but your body won't do it. And so by accepting what happened to you and by saying what happened to you and saying, hey, I'm going to heal from this, you're letting your body kind of say, okay, we're good. It's I guess untrapping it. I'm not an expert in how the body works with that, but I can promise you your trauma is affecting your insides. And so that those two motivated me as to wanting to write a book because there wasn't a way for me to share with other people how powerful not staying silent is. And so that's why I chose to do it. And the process, just like now being on podcast, when you first start writing your story, I can't say that it's not emotional. I mean, it was, even though it was something that happened so long ago, when you're writing it, and I had journaled, right? I had gone through some of the processes before, which is journaling, which is something I recommend to everybody when they don't know where to start. Just start to yourself. Just write it down on paper, just to yourself, about what happened to you, all of those things that are circling in your mind. Put it down on paper, and you can burn it. You don't have to share it with anybody, but that's like one step to get it out. But writing a book was different because I knew I was going to be sharing it with the world. But at the same time, it was very emotional. But what was interesting about it is that each edit, so we write and then we edit. That's my process. And that has always been my process. But each time you read it, it had less weight. It wasn't so heavy, right? And now I don't cry about it, right? Like, it's like, oh yeah, I've had this experience. It's weird. It's like, it's your life, but it doesn't feel like your life anymore. It doesn't feel so personal anymore. And so that was step one. Then the second part of the book was actually publishing it. And that was also very emotional, right? Like, now you're seeing your story. And again, it's about you, in a hard copy book. And then the distribution, where it went out to the world. So all of those steps had their own impact, because not only was I, releasing my own silent, but the people involved. I have a huge family. And so that also affects you, right? When other people who were kind of part of the secret, you've let that out. So they all kind of have their own impact. And now, same thing, when you start talking about it, that's also very emotional. But the more you do it, the less weight it has. So that's what I would say. I think for people who are kind of on this journey, it's hard when you first start, but I promise you, it's just like this, like, weight is lifted. You almost feel like you're on air, because this burden that you've been carrying for so long no longer exists.
Yes. And about the family. Yeah. Like for me too, with like on podcast, even sharing my story, because I'm guest on podcasts too. And I'm sharing my story into detail. And then I'm like, okay. And I always, like to share it on social media, of course. And then my mom's my Facebook friend. And I'm like, oh, I wonder if she's going to hear the details. But, I don't blame her because I never told her. And she would have put a stop to it. I know if she did know, but she didn't. And someone had asked me, do you think that she takes responsibility of it? I'm like, to be honest, I don't know. But the weirdest thing is that it's never been talked about since that day when I was 22. And this is back in 2003. I don't know. Somewhere there. And then, and then, um, and then they're like, well, it's never been brought up. I said, no. I said, but I'm sure she's heard it many times now from the podcast because I'm sharing my story everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Yeah.
My mom, I think, just is in the same place she was my whole life, which is just denial, no self-responsibility. And I have a lot of empathy for her. She had an arranged marriage when she was 16, 17 years old. And then her job was to have kids, and she had 10 kids. And
Oh,
that's what my dad wanted from her. So I had a lot of empathy, especially when I was a kid, for her, because to me, she was in the same place. She was another person in the house being abused by my dad.
wow.
Once I became a mom, that's when I kind of had a little bit more anger towards her. Still have the empathy, but you know, protecting your child is so like innate, like it just comes out. You don't really have to do anything for that. And so, for her never to have said anything and continue to just be in this place of denial is hard. Especially when you want more from your mom. But I've grieved that already, right? Like, these are all part of like, okay, that's not the mom I had, and that's okay, and I get to be something different. And I think that's also so important for people that have gone through this, is like, you don't have to pass it on to your kid. I don't have to pass on this generational trauma to my daughter, and the experiences and what I went through to her, not the abuse, but even the consequences of the abuse. I don't need to pass that on to her.
Yes, we're putting a stop to this generational trauma, and it's now
Yeah.
because my mom was abused by her mom, and I'm sure my grandma was abused by her mom. Fortunately, my mom did the abusing less. There was some name calling here and there, and little smacks, the belt, here and there growing up. Oh, I remember that belt too. The chancla is what we call it, the slipper. I got smacked a couple of times with that one, but I can laugh at it now because it's not me. It's not me, and I don't raise my children that way. Now it's funny. I just have to like look at my kids like they're like they put themselves on timeout. That's it, and they come back down and we talk about it, and then
Yeah.
we hug and love each other. So
Yeah. Which is so beautiful, right? Like to me, that's one of my biggest triumphs is to not pass it on to my daughter and have this relationship with her that I dreamed of, right? Like having a relationship with your daughter talks to you about everything and anything and is able to ask you questions, openly. And you just have an answer. Like, yeah, last night the question was, what's a prostitute? Because we were watching the Titanic and, that was her question. And just again, to be able to, her being comfortable enough to ask me and me being able to tell her, and then we just move on. So.
yeah. Oh yeah, the Titanic. I was like 16 when that came out. I remember that one. Oh my goodness. That just brought back a lot of memories because I was 16 years old with a boyfriend at that time who was abusive also. Very manipulative. We were same age too, very manipulative, very controlling, and wouldn't even let me go to classes sometimes. And so we had to get a restraining order on him. My mom protected me there when I didn't have a voice because I didn't know what was going on. I thought this was love, especially growing up with trauma. I didn't know what was going on. What's true love, We don't know at that age. And but she put a stop to it. So I was grateful for her to put a restraining order on him. I just brought back memories. I was
Oh.
like, that Titanic. I'm like, oh yeah, I saw that with that guy. Anyway, before I get off tangent, because that's what I'm known for. I always like to go off on tangents here and there. You've actually been involved in cases against high profile entities. Now, without divulging confidential details, could you go ahead and share how you actually prepare for such challenging cases and what it means to go up against such powerful opponents?
Yeah, for me, I faced my biggest bully. The biggest bully in my life was my father, and to go up not against him, right? I never like stood up against my dad, but I experienced the biggest bully all growing up. And so now going up against people, I don't really think about it. Like it's it's like, of course, like I'm not scared because I've already gone through it. That's what I believe. I think because I've already experienced something that you can't really scare me anymore than my father did, my whole life. So how is it up against? I mean, we always go up against people with more money, more resources, and that have more power. And to me, being able to say, it doesn't matter how powerful you are, how much money you have, how much influence you have, the rules of law apply to everybody equally, and we all have rights to them. And to be able to stand up for women against these powerful, rich men provides me with a lot of purpose and satisfaction. Because that's the thing, they think if they throw money in who they are, they'll be able to skirt the law, and that's just not the case. And for women to know these laws apply to you, and it doesn't matter that you have less money or influence, is really important. So how do I prepare? I prepare like I would no matter who was on the other side. And the natural ability to do that is because of what I went through.
Yeah, you're right. Yes, you've overcome the ultimate bully. So these other people here are just like, I can take care. I can take care of this.
Yeah,
I
exactly,
can take care of this.
exactly. You don't scare me. I don't know
Yeah.
even if you're trying. I'm not scared of you because I already did it. I've already
Oh,
went through.
I love that. Yes. Oh, this is great. Now, the topic women under attack sexually is unfortunately still very relevant to this day. What are some common misconceptions about sexual abuse that society actually still holds, and how can we address these as a community?
I think the fact that some people just don't think it's happening, right? This idea that, rich, powerful men aren't going to do this because they don't need to. I think that's a misconception. I mean, the fact that the stats are still so high, when I say 50%, I think the stats are higher because there is underreporting and people don't come forward. And so the fact that it's still happening, the fact that we continue to not talk about it needs to change. And you're right. Like the fact that we're under attack sexually about our own bodies and the choices we can make, is mind boggling to me if that we're continuing to have these discussions. But I do believe it's a way to continue to not allow us to rise up because they know how powerful we are. But I think collectively, when we come together, that's how we're going to change the societal and cultural issues that have existed for so long.
Yeah, and what type of advice would you go ahead and give someone who does feel trapped and feels alone and feel like they cannot speak against, with being abused and are kept in silence?
Yeah. So one, I think it's really important to kind of gather your people. I know you feel like you're alone because you're in your circle or you're in your box, right? But find just a little bit outside the box. I mean, I think there are so many resources, there are so many organizations, and there's so many people. I mean, just think about the fact that both of us right now have experienced sexual abuse as children, right? So once you start getting out of your head, right, you'll realize you have this huge community and a support group. You just need to get out of the one that you're currently in. I think it's also important when you feel like I can't do this, right? Like I'm not able to, I'm not powerful enough. I think it's important to kind of take inventory of what you've already accomplished, right? Think about how powerful what you've already done. Kind of the story you were talking about, the picture that you drew, which is interesting that you talk about that. When I was young and in my household before I got out, I prayed. We were religious growing up, and I didn't pray for much. I just prayed to be happy. That was like the simple thing that I wanted every day, was just to be happy and not be surrounded by this conflict and around me. And I would draw a picture every day. Not every day, but when people told you to draw a picture in art or whatever, I had the same picture that I always drew, and I had a picture of a man, a woman, and a child on green grass, the sun shining, a little house in the background, and birds flying. And it was just a real simple drawing. I still draw like a kindergartner, even as an adult. But that same picture kind of followed me around. What was interesting is when I had my daughter, I drew that exact same picture, but it was the life that I had. I was there with my husband, my daughter, on the green grass, on the house, and I drew what we had accomplished. And so just taking inventory of what you wanted and where you're at already, I think is really powerful, because it lets you know that it's already within you. There's just been some things that have prevented you from kind of making more progress. So I just think taking inventory of all that you've already accomplished, whether it be living in the city that you want, having the relationship, having the child, whatever it is that already exists in your life, take inventory of that. And then I think that really helps you go to the next step.
Wow, so your child self already knew that, hey, this is not going to be my life. This is going to be my life here. And you were drawing that picture. That is incredible.
I
That
know.
is a beautiful story, by the way.
Oh.
And knowing that, man, that someone else doesn't know how to draw makes me have comfort, because I still draw like a kid, kindergartner. My kid's like 8 years old, and I mean the other child is like an artist and stuff. Like, where do you get this talent from? Like, I'm a horrible artist, but that is a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, how can individuals who haven't actually experienced abuse themselves support survivors and contribute to a culture that rejects abuse and discrimination?
Believe them, right? Like when somebody's telling you their story, believe them. Don't question, well, why did you do that? Why were you there? I wouldn't have done this. Like that is not helpful. Believe them when they tell you their story. This idea that's, I guess, another misconception, right? Like this idea that women are lying somehow. That's a misconception. Coming forward is not easy. So then you're saying they're coming forward and telling you the story and to make it up for what purpose, right? That is a big misconception. So sorry. So for support, I would say believe them when they're telling you their story.
Yes, yes, and just listen, because sometimes people just are into their own head and doing their own thing. But if someone's trying to reach out to you, take some time to listen, because that itself, just letting it out, like a vomit or a purge that they're wanting to let out, let them hold that space for them, and that maybe that will be their first step, is they're finally telling you something, and it's just to make sure you're there for them. Now you don't have to give them all the tips and tools because you obviously haven't experienced it, but at least listen. And I think that's
Yeah,
one great form of communication, is just listening in
yeah,
itself.
yeah.
Yeah, so where can our listeners go ahead and find your book if they want to go ahead and contact you or find you on social media? Where can they find you?
Sure. I have a website. It's Alreen, ALREEN.com. If they're interested in the book, they can get a free chapter on my website. And then if they still like it, they can go ahead and purchase. And then I also have an Instagram handle. They can find me there. Same, it's Alreen, Alreen. And I would love to connect.
Beautiful. And finally, for our listeners who are dealing with their own traumas or supporting others through similar experiences, what other resources or first steps would you go ahead and recommend to help them stand up for themselves or assist others in doing so?
So I always recommend a therapist, find a therapist. I know, same thing, it's hard to do so, but there are a lot out there and they're not all the same, right? Just like all doctors are not the same. I would give that a try, and I highly recommend finding someone. And there's a website that I don't have in front of me, but I can send it to you after. And it lets you find therapists in your area, the type of gender you want, the specialty that you want, and you can kind of research exactly who you're looking for that takes your insurance, whatever it might be. And I think that's a great way to get on the path to start standing up for yourself.
Beautiful. And I will have everything in the show notes. But Alreen, any other last words or comments you would like to share?
I always tell people like not to wait, right? Like the time is now. There is no better time for you to start on this journey because it is a journey. So it's better to get started sooner rather than later.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and inspiring others to start sharing theirs. So I appreciate you and all the work that you're doing.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much again for having me.
Yes.